Welcome to Mastering the Attention Economy podcast. I'm your host, Ari Lewis. Human attention is a scarce resource that millions of companies across the globe are fighting for. Once a week, I interview entrepreneurs, executives, and industry leaders on how they earn attention for their brands using social content and media. I run a marketing community. Visit brandstreet.com and sign up with the code ARI to receive 25% off your membership. Today's guest is Yaro Bagriy. Yaro is the founder of Newsletter Crew, a community focused on helping creators build newsletters. In today's episode, we discuss building a newsletter community, focusing on a niche, and buying and integrating communities. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey Yaro, thanks so much for joining us today. Been a big fan of the Newsletter Crew for a while, and obviously it was one of the first guests on your podcast. So I've been glad to watch it grow from the early days, but now excited to be interviewing you this time and to talk about the growth of your community and some of the things you're working on.
Thanks, Ari, for having me. Really appreciate it. And man, I've been getting a lot of feedback on your episode. Really, really nice. So thank you for being on. Really appreciate it.
So I want to start off with, you grew up in Ukraine until age 5, and then you moved to the U.S. I always am interested talking with, immigrants because they always seem to have a different perspective, I think, than someone who is born in the U.S. Let's start with that. Can you just talk about you growing up as an immigrant, even though, age 5 is, your childhood essentially is still starting here. How did that affect who you became as a person and sort of your path of becoming an entrepreneur today?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And yeah, so basically, moving here when I was 5, right, I don't really remember too much about the life back in, the mother country. But and obviously, I don't really have an accent. There might be a little bit of an accent. When I speak Ukrainian now, I do have an accent. So that's kind of the flip side there. I spoke a lot of English when I was younger. But yeah, being an immigrant in the U.S., you definitely see a different side of the coin, right? So my parents and I and my sister, so it was 4 of us, came here about 20, I'm almost 29, like almost 24, 25 years ago. They had $100 in their pocket, right? So pretty much, not that much. 20 years ago was a lot, it's $100. It's probably like 200 now, but even then, $100 in your pocket, moving to America by themselves. It's quite hard. It's quite difficult. And growing up, these last 20 years, I've just been seeing them work hard. My parents taking on multiple jobs that aren't maybe the best, physically hard, emotionally, morally. My mom riding her bike, to winter, in winter to get to work because we couldn't afford a car, right? Because we don't have that much money. I definitely saw like a different side of the life, if that makes sense. So that kind of toned me to see life differently, and that's kind of why I went to go to university. And I didn't really get any degree. I try to find the best degree that I could because my parents came here to to give a better life for myself. So I don't want to, even if that wasn't really my passion per se, I definitely wanted to do something that was more, that I could definitely get a job, a high paying job, and, and make it worthwhile to be in America where, it's quite difficult. So I actually got a degree in electrical engineering. And that kind of really, I was more mathematical anyways, but I definitely wanted to find the best degree for the, to get a job. And then after doing electrical engineering for, a few years, I just realized I didn't actually, it was nice, money's great, but it's not really where my passion was. And I realized, I can make money. It's not that hard. It's hard, but it's not that hard. But I guess what I wanted to say is that the way that my parents or the way that we grew up, fairly poor, really shaped me to pursue something that's higher, if that makes sense, which, made me get a degree in electrical engineering. And then once I realized that it's maybe not as cut out, not as awesome as it sounds, I was trying to find other ways to actually make more money that'll be much more fulfilling, if that makes sense. And that's kind of why I got into entrepreneurship. And I kind of saw the hard work that my parents were putting into, kind of keeping us afloat. And I just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of is ingrained in me. So now I just take that and I do that for, my own projects. So I just put the same amount of work as they were putting in, 20 years ago. I'm putting in that same amount of work into my businesses today.
That's a great story, and I think it's a good transition into, you were an electrical engineering major, you still, do some development and technical work. But, even though Newsletter Crew and what you work on are digital products, they're really rooted in content and community. Why did you decide to go down the path of building a business like that when you could have just, been coding iOS apps or coding web apps? Why did you choose something that was very much built in a content expertise, not a technical expertise?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's actually lots to talk about there. So, my main goal has always been to create a SaaS. Like that's what I want to do. I want to, I've been in the bootstrapping space for a while now, but I've been into the startup scene even longer. I created a few startups that mobile apps actually that failed, didn't really do too well. Spent maybe around 6, 7 months while working full time. So I was working like, I don't even know, 80, 100 hours a week. Kind of depressing to see them fail, but definitely made me realize, the startup scene, like the VC Silicon Valley scene wasn't for me, which is kind of why I started getting into bootstrapping. And my main goal is always to make a SaaS, right? Like a micro SaaS or a SaaS solo founder SaaS, where I kind of want to be by myself, grow it to maybe 10, 20K MRR, and kind of live off of that as my income. Now, SaaS and micro SaaS at this moment in time, it's getting pretty competitive. I mean, there's really no new green fields out there, if that makes sense. I mean, you're either, trying to innovate on something that someone's built. There's tons of newsletter ESP tools out there. I mean, there's hundreds of newsletter tools out there, like, where you can build a newsletter on. I mean, there's tens of forums that you can build communities on. There's tons of these. It's just a competitive space now. So that's actually, and that actually kind of leads me to my next point on why I started with Newsletter Crew. So Newsletter Crew at the beginning, way back, I mean, this is when you were, on podcast on episode 11, now we're on episode 34, 35. It was just a podcast. So, and then my main goal was always to create an audience or build a distribution channel for my SaaS products. I chose the newsletter space because, it's a hot market, and not only because it's a hot market, it enables people to be digital entrepreneurs like today. But we can talk about more about that later. But it started as a podcast, and it's built a distribution channel for my SaaS products, and then it just kind of slowly started growing from there. I honestly never really planned to make it a paid community. It just kind of almost fell in my lap. And I don't know if you want to if you want me to get more into that, but that's kind of like, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what's going on there.
It makes a ton of sense, really. I get that. I think, as you've been building the community, one question that I wanted to ask and bring up is, do you think having that technical background will make you, more incentivized to try to start building more digital products around enhancing the experience? I've seen that a lot of, these communities or content plays, right? They don't really have these technical products, but obviously you have the ability to do that. Is that part of your strategy, or are you just mostly focused on the content and the community?
No, now that I've been getting more and more into Newsletter Crew, I'm definitely getting more focused into the community and the content side of things, because it provides just an amazing funnel into anything you want. And now Newsletter Crew is a paid community because it's just providing so much content, and I can kind of get more into why it's paid later. But yeah, I definitely am trying to focus on both content, community, and making a distribution channel for my SaaS. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers the question or not, but
no, it definitely answers the question. As a getting deeper into the content side of things, how do you come up with topics, things to write about? People ask me this question all the time. The question I'm asking you is actually based on a Twitter question that someone asked for this episode, but yeah, I would love to hear your, ideation process on both content, both podcast guests, and anything else that you're creating.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question as well. And so I wouldn't say I'm a really successful newsletter creator. And what's the old saying where it's like, if you can't do, you teach, or something like that. So I was like, I've never created a super successful newsletter with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Um, I've always wanted to, and that's still my goal. So I'm kind of always thinking from almost my perspective, if that makes sense. Like, what if so I'm creating this newsletter. I have a really small one. I have a personal one, that I have one for my other community. But basically what I do is, as I'm coming up with the problems, building my own newsletter, I was like, okay, I need this question answered. Let's go out and find someone that can answer that question. For example, I think I had, well, I had you on episode 11 about newsletter bundling. So that was actually a really interesting conversation because one, I was pretty curious on, should I bundle my newsletter with other newsletters, and two, actually going on Twitter and just kind of reading what people are talking about, seeing the trends within different communities. So I'm a part of multiple different newsletter communities. Obviously pretty plugged into the newsletter community on Twitter, and I just kind of noticed the conversations that are going on. There was tons of people talking about bundling, and bundling was kind of this hot thing that was going on, with the everything bundle and all these other bundles that are coming out. So I was like, okay, I should probably get someone on that could talk about, or that is an expert in bundling and can give their opinion on what bundling is, and if other newsletter creators such as myself or anyone listening, if they should also bundle. Same with, I believe it was episode 18. We did an episode, had a couple guests on about newsletter acquisitions. Also very hot topic that within the newsletter crew community has been a pretty interesting and consistent on a weekly basis about, people wanting to sell their newsletter or looking to buy newsletters. I was like, okay, well, there's people that are asking tons of these questions. There's really no resources out there currently about that. So why not get some of the experts on that and have them kind of talk about it. So I had Chris on there, who's an expert who's done tons of newsletter acquisitions, founder of Deuce, who is its newsletter marketplace, and founder of Letter Exchange, which is another newsletter marketplace. And I got all their opinions on how to value a newsletter, how to purchase a newsletter, how to acquire, sell a newsletter. So yeah, that's kind of how I get my content. I'm just thinking, like, one, what problems am I having? And two, what problems am I seeing other people have? So yeah, that's kind of my thought process, and pretty much that's how it is every week.
Yeah, it's great when you're in the industry that your product is solving, because like if it doesn't help you, then it's not helping your customers and your community and your members. So it's good that those go hand in hand, and is a great great characteristic of a good community. So, on the growth side of things, then let's just talk, like, what have been good ways for you both to acquire users, subscribers, and then paying members. And one question that we had from the audience was, can you also talk about like ways that you've grown, and in general, like ways to grow a newsletter in a community that like you're not going to find, on the internet, that like, these, probably little tidbits. Like for me, one of the things would be like DM people that like you interact with a ton and like literally ask them to subscribe. I don't think, you can Google that. So like, what are examples for you that have worked, both scalable things and non-scalable things?
Yeah, so on the newsletter side of things, actually just yesterday, I also had Maximilian Rovka on the Newsletter Crew podcast, talk about Finimize. And he was telling me some really interesting things on how to grow your newsletter that maybe you probably wouldn't find. At least I definitely didn't think about it. And it apparently attributed to a pretty large amount of his growth, or a large amount of Finimize's growth, is kind of an ambassador program. So, basically get actual people, either, if that's yourself or if someone that, you hire someone out for like $8 an hour or however much, someone's willing to actually do the work for, go out to places like campuses and, just on the street, actually talk to people, get them to sign up right there through your iPhone, your tablet, kind of tell them about, the 30-second pitch on why it's good. And he was saying he was getting around 100 subscribers per day. Obviously you got a couple of brand ambassadors out there doing that. I mean, you could definitely grow a decent amount. Sure, it's not the most scalable way, but the cool thing about it is, what he's noticed is that all of these subscribers that you've got, or that you onboarded basically through real life interactions, one, are more engaged subscribers, and two, are more, how do I say, like they're more of the super users. They definitely advocate for you more. So what they could do is, go home and be like, hey, some person from Finimize, which is a newsletter about financial and investing markets, I just subscribed. Maybe you guys should subscribe too. And so they got a lot of word of mouth as well. And that all just kind of, I don't know, just kind of like propagates, if that makes sense. So that's definitely one, non-scalable, but quite an interesting way to grow that I just, as being a digital entrepreneur, you're never really thinking about, going out into the real life, if that makes sense. Like I'm always trying to find ways to grow online and digitally. But that's kind of the, that's one. The other one is that you kind of talked about is actually, and this kind of riffs off of the first one, is finding meetups. So if you go to meetup.com, I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of medium or meetup groups that are pretty much in every single niche that you could potentially write a newsletter in. So if you're writing a newsletter about gardening, let's say, I'm pretty sure there's a meetup about gardening somewhere in your city. Go there and sign, talk to everyone, sign everyone up, have them become super fans of your newsletter, like if that makes sense. So, that's another way. That's kind of like a non-scalable way. Some of the maybe more scalable digital ways, and maybe this is Googleable or not, but basically, writing, joining a ton of communities, either paid or non-paid, and posting some really, really good content about, something that you can plug, that's something that's related to your newsletter, but also provides value to the community. And, if you can provide 300 times the value in 30 seconds, there's almost no way they're not going to subscribe to your newsletter. So that's kind of some of the more scalable ways. I mean, just kind of thinking, I mean, there's really nothing that's, at least online, that hasn't been already dug, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, you can pretty much Google anything nowadays. I mean, we got cross promotions, we got we have cross promotions, we have, like I said, paid communities. I actually kind of wrote a little bit of a list down. So you got referral programs, you got SEO you can do. So, I mean, those are kind of the general basic ones. I mean, I'm not really sure exactly if there's any secrets that I've seen. DMing people is good as well. I mean, that's kind of one of those non-scalable digital ways to grow. I don't know. Being sponsored in an episode, going on podcasts kind of like this, where I will then plug in, let's say, go to newslettercrew.com to, subscribe and become a better newsletter creator. You can do stuff like that. Just, do the podcast tour, be on 10, 20, 30 podcasts, as many as you can get on, spread the word. I mean, it's a lot of hustling, if that makes sense. It's a lot of growth hacking. I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but those are kind of some of the growth channels I've seen.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And just a couple points there, like the ambassador program. I know Morning Brew used to do this a lot, and I think Austin Reef, who is the co-founder and CEO of Morning Brew, did a thread about this recently where he talked about they launched a ambassador program at colleges because that was like their demographic. But I definitely don't think people think about the ambassador program enough. It's also probably just because I think in order to really do an ambassador program, you probably need scale. Like if you're in like a niche, I don't know if an ambassador program would make sense. But I think the other interesting thing you talked about too was like going on podcasts and doing that. One of the things like that I've learned, and I don't know if you've been the same with this, is you really got to put yourself out there when you're doing like content and you're building these communities. And I just don't think enough people do that. Like whether they're building a community content play, or if they're building a product with a community aspect. Like on the product side of things, people are just like, oh, I'll build something great and people will come and buy it. But that's not true. Like you need to put yourself out there. And then on the content community side, you have to like actively like work to build a community. It doesn't just happen overnight. Have you had, that type of maybe like imposter syndrome or worries like of putting yourself out there? Like how have you tried to, battle that?
Oh yeah, every day. Well, not maybe not every day, but it's definitely on my mind quite frequently, actually. And when I started my first community, Indie Stack, which actually was just recently acquired last week, so that was pretty nice. When I first started that, and actually it's kind of I definitely had imposter syndrome because I never really had a successful SaaS business or successful, like digital product. And that's what Indie Stack was, is a community for indie founders. So that being said, I was never a successful indie founder. And there's tons of people on there that were much more successful than I am that are within the community. So it was always, it was always kind of weird giving advice when you really haven't done it yourself, if that makes sense. I mean, like, sure, a bunch of these things, and but I've never gotten a community, I've never gotten a product to 10K MRR or 20K MRR. So it's definitely, imposter syndrome is definitely a thing that's on my mind. Kind of same with Newsletter Crew. I don't have, like I said before, I don't have a newsletter that has 100,000, a million. I'm not Morning Brew, right? So there's, I'm definitely learning along the way. So, and I think I've learned enough and I've implemented enough in my own newsletters to give advice. But I'm definitely always, it's always on my mind. It's like, am I really qualified to be doing this? And I know I definitely am. It just, it's always that double thing that you always do. Yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers the question there.
Yara, that's a really great answer, and I think it transitions well into sort of like where you're at with Newsletter Crew now. Would you mind sharing the user numbers and revenue, if you don't mind? And I'd also be curious, once we're done talking about that, like what's the future hold, especially from sort of that flywheel perspective? Do you want to double down on what you have going now, or is there maybe new opportunities to grow and make money, something like a merchandise play, for example?
Yeah. Thanks for, no, that definitely makes sense. And so I'll start with the revenue. So at this moment in time, today, we have 251 members, with the average MRR being 600, so $600 per month. And the average MRR per user, I think that adds up to like 2.6 or 2.7 or something like that. So total revenue I've made so far since I kind of started this paid community is, I believe, around 4,500 or something like that. So not terribly a lot. And I was expecting a little more, because as like I said, I acquired Indie Mailer around August timeframe. And that's kind of what sparked me to start creating this paid private community and kind of bring Newsletter Crew to where it is right now. And when I acquired it, there was around 127 members. And in November 2022, it basically, it came around to renew on the yearly renewal, because it's on a yearly cycle. So out of the 127 members, I think around like almost 75% of the members churned. So that definitely kind of hit me pretty hard. I was definitely expecting a much, greater revenue or income bump on that day, and just never came. I mean, that was no problem at all, because I was growing so much since from August to November, from 127 all the way to 200 and about 230. And then obviously, in November it dropped like 50 or 60 members. I don't even know. It was a lot. It was a huge dent. And then I just got it back up to 250. So I onboarded like another 70 or 80 people. But yeah, that being said, that's kind of the revenue numbers right now. My goal is to increase it. My goal is to get to that 59 mark, or sorry, to maybe either 49 or 59 mark. And that's kind of the interesting thing on is the pricing, right? Is, how do you price a paid community, right? And I guess we can probably get into that later, but that's kind of the, revenue numbers there. So pretty happy about that. And that doesn't include, let's say, say podcast sponsorships. That's just the paid membership. So sponsorship is a completely different revenue stream. And if you want, I can definitely dive into that. But But yeah, so sponsorships, I've been earning around $125 per episode. Definitely going to bump that up again in the next cycle. So I did a 3-month contract with Email Octopus, and they're really nice, and I've been getting them tons of users through that podcast. So they're really happy about that. So I'm definitely thinking about bumping that number up and seeing if they want to renew. But I think I've made around through all of my podcast sponsors around 3,500. So 35 plus 45, I think we're at like $8,000. And obviously this is part time. So I'm not really doing this full time. It's around 5 to 8 hours a week for the last 6 months or so. And yeah, so to answer the next to answer the next question, where am I going with Newsletter Crew? Well, I'm definitely going to keep the paid community, and that's kind of the main thing I want to start growing. When I think of membership, I don't think it's, the community is just an aspect of it, right? So you could have a paid community, and that's all it is. It's just a community with really just people talking, kind of like like a golf club or something like that. Or you could definitely, have a membership, which is kind of like the next level up, and have a community plus paid content plus AMAs, webinars, Q&As, private content, private blog content. So currently, as we stand now with Newsletter Crew, we have the paid private community, we have private content that we're doing, we have AMAs that are member-only AMAs, and then we have some member-only resources. So that's kind of the kind of what you get when you join Newsletter Crew. And as I start adding on new things, like for example, what I want to do is start doing monthly meetups. We've done a few monthly meetups, and I want to keep continuing that. Maybe weekly meetups, mastermind groups where we get groups of maybe 7 to 10 people and actually together build your newsletter and have accountability with your newsletter. And yeah, I'm not really sure exactly where I'm going to take it right now, but monthly meetups and AMAs monthly meetups and crap, I forgot what I was going to say. Monthly meetups and mastermind groups are definitely the thing that I want to do now. That being said, I mean, we've got tons of private content as well. So we have almost every other episode has a second part to it, which is another 20 to 10 to 25 minutes of extra content. We have a few private blog posts, private guides that we're having. Another thing that I want to expand into potentially is courses, right? So I don't know if you know Anne Laura from Nest Labs, but she runs her paid private membership called Nest Labs, and she just recently launched a course, I believe like a few weeks ago, and she got in like a week almost like $30,000 in revenue. So that was kind of insane. So that's definitely one thing I want to expand into, but I'm not exactly sure if I want to put the time into that or if I want to put the time into building my SaaS business that could utilize Newsletter Crew as an audience, right? And the other thing I want to get into is, so the more value your membership brings, just the more, just like the more less someone is going to think about joining, right? So, I mean, if you got a paid private community, if you got private content, AMAs, meetups, and then let's say, another thing you add in is, you get free courses and you get extra software. So for example, you become a member of the Newsletter Crew and then you get access to a feedback tool, right? That you could use for your newsletter to get feedback on every single issue. You just get that for free, right? So that's the other thing I'm kind of looking into doing is having a bunch of these micro SaaS tools that anyone being a member of the Newsletter Crew will have access to for free, if that makes sense. And actually, we're developing one right now, and it should launch in probably the next week or two. Is our feedback tool, which is kind of what I was just talking about. The other thing is maybe discounts on certain ESPs or certain services, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, there's so many places I want to go, but it just has to be kind of like one step at a time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying there, and we don't have a ton of time. I try to keep these like 35 minutes, but at most. And I have so many follow-up questions to that, but we had a lot of questions from the audience today, which is great. So I wanted to prioritize those questions first, and then maybe if we have time, we'll go back to what you were saying. But the first question that I had from the audience that I haven't asked yet is a question from Chris, who asked. He is curious how both your newsletter and then maybe others folks that you have spoken to, how you grew from 0 to 1,000 and kept people interested. Because I think what sometimes happens is like maybe you have 100, 200 subscribers and you're like, wow, this is great. I have like a 45% open rate, 50% open rate. And then you're like 800 subscribers and you're like, I have a 25% open rate. Like, how do you make sure people stay engaged as you grow and scale the newsletter?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And how do I answer this without being too too sad about it? But basically, yeah, I mean, as you grow, I mean, there's going to be people that just don't like the content you produce anymore, right? I mean, when you had 200 people, maybe all 200 liked it. I mean, as you start growing to thousands, hundreds of thousands, I mean, there's going to be people out there that maybe have gotten past their phase. Maybe your newsletter covers finance and Bitcoin, let's say, like Crypto Weekly. Let's say you got a crypto newsletter, and you got in on the hype, in 2017, and you're loving, you're just loving Bitcoin, and you're loving crypto, and then at some point, it just hype dies down. You're like, yeah, I'm just kind of over this. Content still might be great. It's just you're not interested in that niche anymore. So you either maybe stop opening or you just outright unsubscribe. And obviously, as you start growing your newsletter, I mean, there's going to be people on there that are uninterested anymore, or well, one, they're uninterested and they don't want to open up your newsletter anymore. So what I recommend for people that are starting to grow and seeing their open rates drop, like you said, 40, anything above 40 is fantastic. As you start getting, start growing, you get, like you said, 25%. Basically just start cleaning out your newsletter list. I mean, once every, 1, 2, 3 months. I mean, what I like to do is if I start dropping below 40 or maybe like 35 or 30, I'm just going to clean out my list and get it back up to 40. So anyone that hasn't opened the last, X amount of issues, just kick them out, unsubscribe them. I mean, sorry, but, if you're not opening the newsletter, one, it hurts your deliverability as well. Because if you're sending newsletters that people aren't opening, ESP just is kind of thinking maybe you're not sending good content, and so your deliverability might drop. And but for those people that if you're worried about the content itself, if you're worried that the content that you're writing isn't engaging enough, then you should probably just give feedback. If you could use feedback tools like the feedback tool work rating, or just leave, or just at the bottom of your newsletter, just say, hey, did you like this? Did you not like this? What would you, what do you want me to talk about? What were the pluses? What are the minuses? And maybe you'll get some of the super users involved. And those are kind of the people that you really want. I mean, you don't really want to keep anyone that's kind of like 50-50 on your newsletter. Maybe they'll open it, maybe they won't. Maybe they're, not, maybe they like most of the content, but not all of it. I mean, you want the people that really like the content enough to actually reply and tell you what the bad things were. That should definitely bump engagement up, because now you're actually hearing from the subscribers themselves on what you want to do versus just kind of shooting in the dark. I mean, there isn't really too many tricks to increase engagement. Just keep writing great content. And again, you can get that, you can get the feedback if your content is great from like a feedback form of people replying to your newsletter. Referral programs are great to kind of bump up engagement as well, because people are interested in, well, one, your super users are interested in onboarding more people to get your rewards, but also they're opening up your newsletter to see, the reward count that they're getting, when their next reward is, and, stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, there isn't really too many tricks other than, just talk to the audience and see exactly what they like, what they don't like. And then from there, just fix it.
Yeah. And again, a lot of follow-up questions to that, but I want to get through the questions that we have. So my next question is, if you're a product company, does it make sense to start a newsletter from like the company point of view or from like the CEO's point of view. So this question is from Jillian, and I think what she's really trying to ask is like, we're seeing a lot of sort of product companies become these content companies, media companies, and they need to have a unique voice. Should that unique voice come from the company as a whole? Does it start with the CEO? I know that maybe might not be up your alley, but if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, definitely a good question. And I mean, so that's awesome. I mean, if you have a CEO that wants to, build a newsletter and talk about your product, that's great. But I think the only problem that I have with someone using having a CEO or create a newsletter that promotes your product or that is based off the product that he or she is, running. Depending on how big the company is, I mean, that CEO could leave. And then what do you do with the newsletter? I mean, the newsletter is tied to their brand, right? It's tied to their person. If they're not a part of your product anymore or your company, obviously they're not going to promote it. They're not going to really talk about it. So what happens then? There's this kind of weird breakup that happens that probably won't go too well. That being said, I mean, I definitely recommend, if you got a company, I mean, just start a company newsletter. I mean, why not? I mean, I'm subscribed to a ton of newsletters that are, by companies. I subscribe to the review newsletter about newsletters. That's definitely one of the big ones I read. And that's a company itself. And their newsletter is kind of one of the best newsletters in the newsletter space. I'm always opening that one because I love knowing and being on top of that. I think the key is if you're going to start a newsletter that is built off your company, make it useful. Don't make it about updates about your company. I mean, if you're in, say you're in the podcast space, you're creating a podcast or a product to record podcasts, online or something like that, or whatever. So say you're in the podcast niche. I mean, create something that would be for other podcasters to learn how to become, better podcasters, or, give them some useful insights. I wouldn't really use it for like product updates or anything like that. I would definitely make it part of the brand, but also its own separate product where, its main goal is to build an audience, right? So that at some point you can sell your products. But anyways, I mean, to answer the main question, I would definitely just, make it a part of your product. I mean, no harm in that.
Yeah, and my one comment there is it's so important when people, and I'm sure you see this all the time, is like their newsletters are informative. They're not selling, and there's a subtle difference of like you can use your product to sell but make it informative. I think like CB Insights does a good job of this, but you can't be like blatantly like buy my product, here's why, or people just end up unsubscribing. So it defeats the point of a newsletter. But two other questions left from the audience. These should have, I think, really much shorter answers. The first is, what's an emerging digital product that is not yet mainstream, which creators should be paying attention to?
Nice. That's and we were kind of talking about this before. Letterdrop, I believe it's what it's called, Letterdrop. Letterdrop.co is definitely one of those products that not many people know about, but is actually really useful if you're starting a newsletter. Some of the really cool benefits are, you could write your newsletter, you can make it paid, you can make it private, you can make it public. So kind of like what Substack has. One, they don't take any of the the revenue that you make is yours, right? So you just have to pay the monthly fee, which is great. So much better than Substack. And two, they have a built-in referral system. So that's also really, really good. I mean, why pay an extra, 20 or 25 or 30 or however much for a referral system when it's already just built into the newsletter itself? So, that's awesome. So that's one of those, if I had to pick one tool, that would be the one tool that's still not mainstream, but is amazing.
Yeah, and I agree. I think Parthy's doing a really good job at Letterdrop, and if you guys are listening to this, I would definitely recommend checking it out. So last question from the audience, and then I'll have one question to end it is, and there should be a pretty simple answer: the worst advice you have ever received for building Newsletter Crew.
So like the worst advice that I received to build Newsletter Crew or to build newsletters?
Yeah. So when you were talking to people, about building it, like what was a piece of advice that you got that was just terrible that like, the person really thought was good advice?
Ah, man. Yeah, I mean, I guess the best advice was just lower your membership cost. I'm like, well, that's that's just really bad advice, because it almost degrades your offering, right? So the cheaper it is like the worse it is. Like, people kind of associate cost to worth, right? Or to value. So I was like, I guess there was at some point where sales weren't doing too well, and they were just like, hey man, just lower prices. I'm like, well, that's probably not a really good idea, because sure, I'll make it more people, but is it the right type of customer that I want? So that's probably the worst advice I had, at least. And that's kind of just advice for any membership out there. So if you have a membership, I mean, keep prices like fairly high. I mean, it depends on your market, right? But, yeah, I mean, keep them high. I mean, keep them like at least above like, $39, $49 a year. I mean, at the minimum, don't try to make it like $9 a year, like $1 a month. Unless you're trying to help people out, like privately giving them like that type of discount. But like publicly, I mean, you should definitely have a higher price. Don't undervalue your product.
Great answer. And yeah, I would always tell people increase price. It's like the one piece of advice that I think is like universal truth. If you have value, people will pay more for it. So the last question that I ask people who have on the podcast is, you've been building Newsletter Crew for a bit now. What is like one lesson you've learned that you would love for the audience to take away?
Yeah, definitely. If you're building a community or if you're building a membership site, the number one piece of advice is, it's about the community, and it's about it's about them, right? So you're, as a community manager, as a community owner, I'm a servant to them, right? So whatever they want, if they need help, I'm there, I'm helping them. I mean, that's my job now. I try to always put community above self, if that makes sense. So never, always trying to, on my Twitter, at least for Indie Stack, I was doing this, before I sold it quite a lot, where I was highlighting members' achievements inside the community, never my own, if that makes sense. So always, I guess that's the main piece of advice: put community over self.
Yeah, that's a great advice. Love it. So, thanks so much for coming on, Yaro. Really appreciate it. I'll put it in the show notes, but just so you can say it out loud. If folks want to join Newsletter Crew, if they want to follow you on Twitter, follow Newsletter Crew on Twitter or social media, where can they find you all?
Yeah, so we're Newsletter Crew pretty much everywhere. So newslettercrew.com, at Newsletter Crew, probably the best place to find Newsletter Crew. And if you want to subscribe to my own newsletter, my personal newsletter, you could just go to yarobagriy.com. That'll have, weekly newsletter where I pretty much talk about my story, kind of like this, but just on a week-to-week basis. And that's kind of where you can find me. So, and also at Yaro Bagriy on Twitter. So yeah, thanks for having me, Ari. It was really, really awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. And until next time, everyone, have a good one. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider giving us 5 stars on iTunes. If you're listening to us on YouTube, consider hitting the like button and commenting on what you enjoyed. I'd really appreciate it.